Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of Wharfedale Naturalists. Our speaker tonight, many of you will know very well, it's Anne Riley. We've had Anne already to speak this season, and those of you who attended that first talk will know that we are in for an absolute delight tonight. Anne is the most wonderful photographer in general, and a particularly wonderful photographer of insects. And the history of this particular occasion is that when we invited Anne last time, it became painfully apparent that we had only seen a tiny subset of what Anne had available to show us. And in fact, we got through the year as far as June last time. And so we thought it would be good to invite Anne back to see whether we could get right through the year. Anne tells me that having whittled down a selection of 220 photos from lunchtime, we have now ended up getting as far as August. So I think we're going to have a third occasion to see the remaining photographs. But anyhow, in order to make it possible to get through as many of those that she has available tonight as possible, I'm going now to shut up and hand over to Anne. Thank you.
Right, good evening everybody. So yes, the nature of lockdown in Burley and Wharfedale part 2. I certainly hadn't and don't anticipate having a part 3, but it did become very obvious that there was no way I was going to get to the end of December. So let's see if we can at least get until the end of August. And all this goes to show us how much fantastic stuff there is to be seen locally if you can just take the time to look. So here we are in July now, and the garden's looking really colourful. This is the back garden, and wild carrot. We had 2 or 3 plants of wild carrot, and they were really, really successful. They produced so many flower heads, very attractive, and just to look at, and also to insects. And the front garden now, well, there are paths, you have to take my word for it, but really mostly it's flowering plants providing a huge range of pollen and nectar and hiding places and habitat, nest places. So our garden really is a haven for wildlife, and I want to show you some of the things that we've seen. Now, I actually spent a lot of time in the garden. I did venture up my little bull farm path and onto Moor Lane, but really I had to drag myself away from the garden because it was just so good. So we have things like a honeybee here enjoying the pollen and nectar from a muskmallow, and you can really see why it's a pollinator, can't you? It's absolutely covered in pollen, which it will transfer to other plants, but it's also got its little collection that it can take back to its nest. And if you notice the colour of the pollen, what I noticed was, you know, depending on which plant, which flower it's been collecting from, and they do tend to be quite faithful to one flower, a small group of flowers at a time, you get different colours of pollen, which is quite fun. So here we've got some very pink pollen, and here it's on a field scabious, which is a very good plant for insects. And also on a field scabious, I was very pleased to see a 10-spot ladybird. This isn't a ladybird that I record that often in the garden, not even every year, perhaps. It's closely related to the 2-spot ladybird, and you could almost mistake it for the succinea form of a harlequin from the pattern, but the size really should tell you that it's not a harlequin. Harlequins have a size range, but they really don't go as small as this, so quite a small ladybird. And already on our ragwort, of which we do have quite a number of plants because it's just wonderful from all sorts of points of view, we have our own homegrown cinnabar caterpillars because we now have an established colony of the moths, and they're already chomping away on the ragwort. It's not even got into flower yet, and of course they will grow and molt and change the skins. And here, just as an aside, is my little friend, the flower bug, the one that bites and leaves nasty lumps. And this is a bug that I saw really from, well, February nearly all the way through to December. So it's all over the place all over the time, and nothing in nature gets wasted. And here there's a rather nice fly, and it's eating a cast-off skin from a cinnabar caterpillar. Now, you think of insects as pollinators, of course, everybody knows that, but perhaps don't think quite so much of their role as recyclers. And this is a very important ecosystem service that insects provide. If it wasn't for insects, and particularly things like flies and beetles, we would be knee-deep in excrement, in dead and decaying things, and it wouldn't get recycled. But flies, beetles, other insects will recycle all the waste and back into the circle of life. Now, caterpillars, in June, Nairi Fernley gave me some emperor moth caterpillars, which I very gratefully accepted, with instructions on how to rear them. She said, well, they're quite like bramble, even though you might not think of bramble upon the moor, but a lot of caterpillars can be reared on bramble. And so this is what they look like in June. I can't really show you a scale here, but they were really quite tiny. And of course they ate and grew and cast the skins. And by July, with these fabulous green coloured caterpillars, which you might think, well, that's not really very good camouflage, but all the little white spots here, if you think about what heather looks like and you think about the buds, you know, they actually would hide very well. But the other thing I want to tell you about is this is a caterpillar, and it's an insect. So it will have 6 true legs here. But caterpillars also have these fleshy prolegs, and the number varies with the family and the species. It can be anything between 2 and 5 pairs, and that's quite a good way of telling you which group it might belong to if you find a caterpillar. And so this one's got 5 pairs of prolegs, finishing with this lot, these here, which are the anal claspers. And the prolegs, these fleshy stumps, these are what helps the caterpillar grip onto a twig, because it hasn't got a skeleton, so it has to use sort of a surrogate skeleton, if you like, to contract its muscles against to move. And the feet themselves are absolutely fascinating. So, and I found a little trick here, because you can actually zoom up even more on a section. So if you look at the feet in close-up, they finish in this pad, which apparently is called a crochet. I presume it's not a crotchet or a crochet-like hook, covered with these tiny little barbs, and they act just like Velcro. If you see here, those tiny little barbs, they've come together, so that will give it a really firm anchor around the twig that it's moving along. And oops, I'll come out of that. And moving to the next slide, so now you can see the locomotion in action. And what happens is a wave of contraction moves from the back of the caterpillar to the front, and it lifts and closes its legs as appropriate as the movement goes along. And that's clever enough, but apparently it's even cleverer than that, because inside the caterpillar, its gut is sort of, if you like, strung at the front and the back end, and it's been shown that the gut actually moves in advance of the muscle contraction, right? So it's like its gut is swinging free and swings forward to help the propulsion. So I think it sounds a bit like when you're walking along and you swing your arms. So that's how a caterpillar moves. Now it's a really handsome caterpillar. It's pretty impressive if you look at the business end, the head, where it's chomping on some vegetation there. So really very handsome, very attractive. Now other groups of insects also have larvae, of course, but they're not always quite as attractive as butterfly and moth caterpillars. And these are in fact beetle larvae, and you can see they've been absolutely shredding this leaf, which is an alder leaf. And they don't have the prolegs. Now, even I wouldn't call this beautiful. And it is the larva of an alderleaf beetle. So it's going to grow up to look like this, which is a female, heavily pregnant with eggs, and so you're going to get lots more larvae. Now, this was a species that was thought to be extinct in the UK, or it was extinct in the UK during the last century, but reappeared around 2004 in Manchester, apparently. And they've since become very widespread, and we've certainly got lots at Otley wetland, lots at Sunland, and lots up the road just here, and they seem to be having quite a significant effect on the infested trees. And probably what happened is it was importation of foreign sucker trees, like so many things that have come in that are possibly damaging. So although it was a native species, it now really seems to have taken hold. So it remains to be seen how much damage it might do, but they've certainly got big appetites. Now, bees, a few bees. This is a little solitary bee. Now, there are around 250 species of solitary bee, plus the 20-odd species of bumblebee and the one honeybee. So by far the majority of the bees that we've got are solitary bees, and many of them are really tiny. This is on a trailing lobelia flower, so that's not a big flower. So you can see it's a very small bee, maybe 3 millimeters possibly, but it's got a big collection of pollen. It's got hairy legs to collect the pollen. I can't tell you what the species is, but I just thought it was rather nice. And another very small bee, this is one of the Hylaeus bees, the yellow-faced bees. Now this one, if you notice, it's not got such a lot of hairs, not got any obvious external means of collecting pollen. And what it is doing, this is a toadflax flower, so very small. It's actually eating pollen from a stamen here. And in fact, I should use my little trick. I don't not see it awfully much better, but there you are. So you can see that it's actually eating pollen from the end of a stamen, and it will take this pollen back to its nest in its crop mixed with nectar, and it's the brood cells are lined with a sort of cellophane, and it puts this semi-liquid pollen and nectar stuff into the individual cells like that. It will incidentally provide some pollination services, I imagine, because it will have little bits of pollen sticking to it. A much bigger solitary bee, and a very handsome one and an easily recognisable one, is the woolcarder bee. This is really quite a large bee, bigger than a honeybee, and unusually for well, an insect species really, the male is quite a lot bigger than the female, although I think this is a female, and she collects pollen on hairs that are under the abdomen. And they've got beautiful faces, and also really quite fearsome looking jaws, and you can probably just make out those are quite serrated toothed jaws, and she will use those to it's a woolcarder bee, right? She will use those to card the hairs from suitable leaves, like lambsia. Lambsia is a really good plant for the woolcarder bee, and she uses those to construct the brood cells in her nest, which will be in a hole somewhere, or possibly a hollow stem or wood or whatever. But they're very entertaining bees to watch. The males are very territorial, and he will attack all comers, and he'll bash into any other insect that comes anywhere near. So you see this little bee and it's darting about like this, and then all of a sudden a honeybee or some innocent bumblebee will come along and it'll get elbowed by a male woolcarder. few hoverflies. Now there are 280 species of hoverfly, and I'm no good at hoverflies, just a few species that I recognise, but this is one of the ones that I do recognise. It's quite easy. It's Skiva pyrastri with these creamy comma markings. And the other thing you will notice about this is that the eyes are just fairly well separated there. And then if you look at another example of the same hoverfly, you may notice that the eyes here are close together. Now, for a long time, I've known that male hoverflies have their eyes close together, shifty, so you can tell it's a male, whereas the females are more widely spaced, and that's one way of telling them. And in several insect groups, you may have males with their eyes closer together than females, but things like dragonflies, there's no difference. What I didn't know was there is a special word for this. And this was, as usual, a comment from George McGavin. I'd sent him a picture, not of this species, and he said something like, I think it's a female because the males are holoptic. And I thought, holoptic, holoptic. I wonder if that's the posh word for having the eyes close together. So I looked it up. So it is. So that is a holoptic male Skiva pyrastri. And here he is again, and just covered in a, well, not covered, just got a few raindrops, make it rather attractive on the red valerian, which is a marvellous plant, of course. Now, most hoverflies mate sort of piggyback fashion. But this particular species, which is Sphaerophoria scripta, it has a characteristically very long abdomen, they mate end to end. And apparently, again from George, this is because of the rotation of the genital capsule. So that means that in order to engage the male and female, you end up with an end-to-end mating. These are not hoverflies, these are flies, these are scuttleflies, Phoridae, or horrid phorids as some people call them, very definitely mating in the piggyback fashion, and very vigorously, I have to say, and this went on for quite some time. These are only about 3 millimeters, these flies. And another fly that often gets misidentified as a bumblebee because it's big and round and hairy, is this one. And over the years, I've probably had more queries about this particular insect than any other I can think of. You know, what's this big black bumblebee? Well, it's a fly, and it's a very distinctive fly. It's the largest fly of this family, the tachinid family, and it's one of our largest flies. And when I first came across this in the garden quite a lot of years ago now, it struck me that it had a distinct resemblance to a children's television character, a Teletubby. So from that moment on, I have called this the Teletubby fly, but it is in fact Tachina grossa, and the closely related species Tachina ferra. So these flies, the tachinid flies, have very nasty habits because they lay their eggs on other insects' larvae, often lepidopteran larvae, where they become ectoparasites and eat the larvae alive. There are a lot of this group of bugs in the country, but in the garden. This is a myrid bug, Myridae, and many of them are green and quite difficult to separate. But I think this one is the potato capsid. It's got these 2 dots here. But the way that you tell this particular family of bugs is the presence of these 2 closed cells on the membrane bit just here. But I just quite like the image of this. And this bug, it's a plant feeder. This bug belongs to the same family, looks completely different, but it's very readily recognizable with its bright green legs, which you perhaps can't see quite so well because it's camouflaged against the green leaf, but those legs are bright green, brown body. But the really distinctive feature, of course, are the antennae with these great flattened bits here, and that's Heterotoma planicornis. And in addition, it feeds on small insects. So not just a plant feeder. Still on bugs, this is one of the 9 species of froghopper that we have in the UK, and these are the insects whose larvae make the cuckoo spit. And I think they're quite cute, and I became determined to get a head-on shot because I do like head-on shots of insects, and it was very, very difficult. And so by this stage in July, this was about my best effort. And of course I got my finger behind because I'm trying to push the leaf so that I can get it to look at me. They don't like looking at you very much, don't insects? But you can see the characteristic of a bug here, just about with its pointed beak or rostrum, that it sticks into the plant to suck up the sap. The ubiquitous bunking beetles here, these are soldier beetles, often to be found on hogweed and often to be found in mating pairs. This, of course, is not hogweed, it's wild carrot. And I've not found an explanation as to why some carrot flowers have got these little purple ones in the middle. So I don't know what the purpose is, and I don't know what the story is behind that. So if anybody can tell me definitively why some wild carrot has those little purple bits, that would be very nice. We don't get many burnet moths in the garden, but they are absolutely gorgeous. When we do, it's always the 6-spot burnet, not the narrow-bordered 5-spot that's also in the area. And they are a fabulous day-flying moth, very striking. And it's the wings, I mean, they're described as black with the red spots, but it's not really even black. It's sort of a vivid bottle green with the iridescence. It's absolutely beautiful. The reason it can afford to fly in the day is because it is telling predators very clearly that it is poisonous, with the warning colours of the red on the black. And the reason it's poisonous is because the caterpillars feed on bird's foot trefoil, and bird's foot trefoil contains the components, if you like, for making cyanide. And so this insect at all its life stages contains hydrogen cyanide, and in sufficient quantities could kill a predator. So a very efficient means of keeping safe and being able to fly during the day. And I just liked this shot because although this is overexposed, it's a bit like a painting, so quite nice arty view. But then the wings do look proper black in that, so it just depends on the angle of the light if you're talking about iridescence. Now, winged ants. What are winged ants? Well, of course, it's not a separate species at all. Ants have a winged stage when a colony produces queens, new queens, and males. Ants, I suppose, are wasps that have lost their wings in the course of evolution, but they do need this winged stage so that they can disperse and found new colonies. And there's a bit of a myth that there is a winged ant day when all over the country all the winged ants emerge. It's not quite true. They will only come out in certain weather conditions. It needs to be warm and humid, so it tends to be during a fairly short period in July and August if we're lucky. This is our patio, and you can see, old stones, uneven cracks, but it's wonderful habitat. I mean, why would you want crazy paving with cement all down and deprive all these things of a home? Endless fascination. So the ants come out, and after mating, the queens are going to need to fly off somewhere to find suitable nest sites. And the queens are a bit big and heavy, really, and rather than trying to take off from the ground, they shin up the nearest bit of suitable vegetation. And this is a nice little geranium that we've got growing out of a crack in the patio. And so here you've got a queen full of eggs and a little male, another little male there. And the competition for the best launch pads is quite fierce, really. And so you've got two queens here, and this one said, hang on, I was here first, you know, you wait your turn. And a male thinking, oh God, let him sort it out. She looks just about all done in, you know, she's going to get to the top there and she'll hopefully still be able to fly. And when they do find a suitable nesting site, the female will bite off her wings because they're of no further use, and then she'll go on to lay the now fertilized eggs and start a new colony. So I did drag myself away from the garden from time to time and go on my footpath from up to Stead and up to Moor Lane. And the Bull Farm path now is really well overgrown and lined with things like spear thistles, which are always a good place to look, and hogweed, which is a wonderful plant for insects. And on the hogweed, there's some interesting hoverflies that didn't get in the garden, and this one is Leucozona glauca, and it's a very pretty hoverfly, and you can see, of course, that it's a female because its eyes are not holoptic. And this one is one of the most striking hoverflies that I've ever seen, or certainly its eyes are. And this is Chrysogaster solstitialis. And you can see, you know, the fleshy mouth parts, which do like a pad, and it's dabbing away here. I'll get my little magnifying glass again. So it's dabbing away here at the pollen on a stamen on the hogweed. I think that's a rather nice hoverfly. And another insect, which is quite recognisable, quite distinctive, with its yellow abdomen and then these dusky wings. This is a fungus gnat. And fungus gnats can be a pest to gardeners, certainly a pest to mushroom growers, because, as it suggests, the larvae will eat fungi, but they will also eat roots of your plants. And so you look on any gardening website, and there's all sorts of advice on how to get rid of fungus gnats. But I think that's quite a nice looking insect. And hawthorn shield bug in its summer plumage on a nettle flower. Nettles are just marvellous plants for looking for things. Well, personally, I like blowflies. I think there's some very handsome blowflies. This one is Lucilia somebody or other. There are a lot of similar species, so I'm not sure entirely which, but they're wonderful colours, green bottle if you like. But it's their larvae, the maggots, that are really such great recyclers and will take care of all sorts of decaying matter. And in fact, are used medically to debride wounds because they are very efficient at eating away necrotic tissue. And then finally, up at the top of Moor Lane, there are quite a number of burdock plants. Now, burdock, sticky bobs, from a distance, it's a weed, of course. It doesn't look anything much, but the flowers are really quite pretty and close up, and they vary in colour. This is quite a nice, deeply coloured one. Very efficient dispersal mechanism for the seeds with these little hook barbs, you know, they'll get stuck in your clothing or on dogs' hair or whatever. But they're very attractive also to insects. And this is a marmalade hoverfly, Episurfus balteatus, but I just thought it looked rather nice with the light catching those hairs. But what I'm really looking for, and this is its eyes, yes, insect eyes are wonderful with all the little ommatidia, you know, the compound eyes, obviously not like ours, entirely different way of seeing, but they're very attractive in close-up. what I'm really looking for are these fruit flies, picture wing flies, if you like. This one particularly lives on burdock, Terrelia tussilaginis, and the females have a long ovipositor, and it's longer than this because this is like a telescope, and this little sharp bit comes out the end, and with that they will lay their eggs into the flower head and inject the eggs in there, and the developing larvae become encased in a gall, so they are gall forming flies. And their mating habits are very interesting. Not that I'm obsessed with insect mating, but it's just quite interesting. I wanted to get a really good close-up of the mating in action, because the male genitalia are quite extraordinary, because you can't really see very well on here, but there's all sorts of hooks and prongs and goodness knows what, and he has to engage with her. The male is smaller than the female, noticeably smaller than the female, they often engage in threesomes, which is quite entertaining. And here we have the three of them, and there's a fair old performance as the usurper is trying to turf off the one in pole position. And I'm not even sure whether it's the same three, because it had happened a lot. But in this particular group here, you've got a small male here who's way in the wrong position because he's hanging over her head. There is no way that her end and his end are going to meet in the right order. So he's hanging on in there. There's another male here who's slightly larger, and he's got a much better idea of what he's trying to do. And she's obviously trying to cooperate with this usurping male here, because she's bringing her abdomen closer. And time for a close-up here. So you can see he is getting ready to engage, is the polite term. I hope nobody's too upset by all this. Carry on. And then here he's almost got engaged, and then for some reason it all went wrong and he just gave up. He could not, because this male was just blocking him from making a proper connection. He just couldn't do it, and so he went off. And so this poor female fly is stuck with a very inept suitor. And I think that must have been a quarter of an hour at least. Now, I don't know what passerbys thought as I'm standing there muttering all sorts of things, taking picture after picture, but certainly passed the time. Which brings us to August. It's a good job I didn't think I was going to get to December. Anyway, so in August the ragwort is really in full bloom, and I took some time just to look at flowers, and it struck me how very beautiful something like purple loosestrife is if you look in close up, and particularly when it's fresh. And the pollen is this wonderful turquoise colour, which really looks very nice against the pink. And here again, so then I started looking at some other stamens in close-up, and devil's bit scabious is one of our later flowers that's really very attractive to insects, and it just looks rather nice when you see it in close-up. But back to the insects, and 2 days running I had two different species of this group of flies, the conopid flies, the thick-headed flies, and this one is Physocephala rufipes. And it's quite a fierce looking thing. Now this here sticking out of its mouth is a proboscis, but it's elbowed, it's geniculate, and it's quite rigid, and that's just its adaptation for feeding from flowers, but it makes it look really quite odd. And then the other, Conops quadrifasciata, I actually got a mating, or just having mated or about to mate, pair, and they danced around for quite some time. And if you look in close up at the female, you can see that the end of her abdomen, well, it's a bit like a can opener. And there is a reason for that, because these flies attack bumblebees, and the female will land on a bumblebee in flight and use this can opener to prise open abdominal segments on the bumblebee so that it can insert an egg, and then it'll leave, and it's done all that in flight. Now, the egg will develop in the unfortunate bumblebee, and it affects its brain, because the bumblebee is somehow commanded to dig into the ground, burrow into the ground, and it will die as it gets eaten, as the developing larva consumes it. First of all, it'll suck it dry, and then it'll eat all the important bits, so it keeps it alive for as long as possible. And then a new conopid emerges. So it's a fairly gruesome insect, but interesting. And this is one of our two largest hoverflies. This one's Volucella inanis, the lesser hornet hoverfly. This one's got pretty gruesome habits as well, because this lays its eggs in hornets or wasp nest, where the larvae are ectoparasites on the wasp or hornet larvae. And then its even bigger relative, Volucella zonaria, also lays in wasps and hornet nests, but its larvae develop as commensal. They just scavenge. I think I've got those two the right way around, possibly not. That's our two big hoverflies. And this one, Chrysotoxum arcuatum, I just liked it. I'd not seen it in the garden before, and I just thought it was a very attractive hoverfly with these very attractive, almost greeny eyes. And Myothropa florea is a recognisable hoverfly with all this very gold at this time of year. And again, you can see the mouth parts adapted for padding pollen and nectar. A lot of the larvae of these hoverflies are aphid eaters, which gardeners might consider very useful. And just another nice hoverfly name temporarily escapes me. And this one, I never did find a name, but I just thought it had the most fabulous eyes. I thought that the really fabulous, intense red coloured eyes, and that of course is holoptic. And I don't recall ever finding a hoverfly empty cocoon before, but I think that's what that is. These little flies belong to the Sepsidae, and they're sort of signal flies. They will spend a lot of time waving the wings, and you get these tiny little black dots. It's only about 3 millimeters. They're present, members of that family are present now, right the way through the year, and they are scavengers on excrement, including human excrement apparently, and so perform a very useful function. Now, when I found this mating pair, I was very excited, because at first I thought it was my little humpyback fly, Bicelaria vana, the one that I'd found before. And so I sent them to George, and he said, well, no, the hump's not big enough. I'm not sure of the species, but I know a man who does. Send your pictures to this professor in Czechoslovakia, Professor Miroslav Bartak. So I did, and within 5 minutes, that's just another view of looking quite nice. Within 5 minutes, I had a reply. Dear Anne, probably it is Trichina clavipes, see enclosed paper, with a nice paper telling me all about them. So I thought that was very good service. That I found these eggs all over a scabious stem, and I thought, well, there must be butterfly or moth eggs. And over a few days, it started to change colour. Obviously, the larvae were developing inside. The ubiquitous flower bug was feeding on them because it's good source of food. So in this one you can see it's got its rostrum stuck right into an egg there, sucking the poor unfortunate developing larva. This is the nymph of the flower bug, and that's doing exactly the same. And it took me ages to actually see what was hatching from these, because they were hatching, they were empty eggshells. And eventually I saw the caterpillar, and they really very quickly after coming out of the eggshell, they would shin down a silken thread and disappear. Now, this is a case in point about how many prolegs, because this has got the middle prolegs missing. This, I think it must be a geometer caterpillar, but I have absolutely no idea what the species are. And in this one, you can actually see this poor little caterpillar is just coming out of the egg, and the Anthocorys nymph is already feeding on it. So, now, this is Anthocorys nymph again, so I'm really getting into the Anthocorys nymph, and this was, my fingers nearly fell off photographing this sequence because it was so fantastic. So this, here it's attacking a little baby aphid. Really, by this stage of the summer, started to feel really sorry for aphids. There are 500 species in the UK, green fly, black fly, all sorts of other colours as well. And they're actually fascinating insects, and they are food for so many things. And here you can see, and now it's got it behind the neck, and now it's sort of worrying it like a dog with a rabbit or something. And now it's well and truly speared. And that was, I lost that one, but this was happening a lot. And this one, a different insect, has actually got one straight through the brain, and it's sort of, this aphid's feeding on the sap of a tansy and then sucked dry. And then I found this, and I had no idea what it was. I thought, well, this is a pink aphid. What on earth is it, and what's it sat on? I just could not work it out at all. So I sent the picture to George, and the reply came back. It's been parasitized by a small wasp that has now finished eating and has come out of the aphid and spun its cocoon beneath. # return of the mummy. And I thought, well, what's he on about? Return of the mummy? And that. So I looked up aphid mummy, and all became clear. And I'm just amazed that I didn't know anything about this until this summer. That's a better view, and here you can see it's been hollowed out, and they're just flaps attached to this silken cocoon beneath. So my next project was, I want to see a wasp parasitizing an aphid. And I did on more than one occasion. Just a question of spending an awful long time hanging around watching aphids. So here we have a tiny wasp. So aphids are not big. So the wasp is 2 millimeters max, and it's riding it like, you know, a bucking bronco, and sticking its ovipositor in and laying an egg. And it will eat out the aphid, and then you'll get the aphid mummy from which the new wasp will appear. Now, still with aphids, this is a lacewing egg. This is another predator of the poor little aphids, and this is a lacewing larva. Now, fortunately, aphids, well, fortunately for all the insects and other creatures that feed on them, aphids produce rather rapidly. And I knew that, you know, one of the methods, because they have all sorts of different ways of reproducing, is to give live birth. And I wanted to get pictures of one giving birth. So here was my best sequence. So here's a little baby aphid coming out. And there it is, plopped safely onto the ground. It just reminded me of a wildebeest on the plains of Africa. There's this little spindly-legged aphid being born. So, and just a last couple of pictures of aphids, because I think actually they're really quite attractive. This is a tansy aphid, and then that was the picture that I started with. And it just occurred to me, you know, if gardeners use pesticides to control aphids, what is the point? Firstly, aphids are food for so many other things. And if you have a well-balanced garden, you will have plenty of natural predators that will take care of your aphids. And if they really get to be a problem on a favourite plant, you just run your fingers down, squash a few. But they are fascinating insects. And there are, of course, bugs, with the sucking mouth parts. So, why don't we all just go pesticide free? Why would you want to use pesticides in your garden? Just enjoy what's there and learn about all the interconnections, and that's a far better way. And then one last picture, and then I'll be within my time, although we're not quite at the end of August. But I said I really tried to get a good face-on shot of a frog hopper, and this one was my best effort in the end. So I think that's quite nice and clear, and it looks like it's sort of with a rising sun behind. I think that's a flower. I don't know what flower it was, but it just came out of that, and I think it's on my finger actually. But there you go. So I will leave it there, and then I haven't gone over my 3/4 of an hour. So thank you.
Thanks, Anne. If you did want a couple more minutes, that will be fine. If you've got the first week of September, or is that a natural break?
Oh, it can be a natural break, because there's only a couple more for the end of August, but they're not quite as pretty pictures. So
okay. Well, marvellous as ever, Anne, from astonishing photographs of Velcro on caterpillar feet to behaviour that nobody could condone in any civilized world of murder and sex and all those kind of things. So yeah, the full range of stuff, but brilliant knowledge as well as the photography. And it's kind of, every time we see your pictures, one of the first questions we've got tonight is, what camera do you use? Which probably, to be fair, puts too much credit to the equipment rather than the user. But I know you've answered this last time as well, but remind us what
so the camera is a little Olympus TG6. It's really marketed as a tough underwater camera, but it has a very good macro. So it's a little compact camera with a fixed lens, so no fancy attachments. It weighs, I don't know, maybe 200 grams. I've not weighed it recently, but it'll fit in your pocket. So really the key to getting good photographs is to always have your camera, and always be there ready, prepared, with a piece of equipment that's easy to use. You will get much better results with a fancy Canon setup with a lens and the flash and all the rest of it. You'll get much better results in terms of the sharpness and clarity of the picture and all the rest of it. But you won't get half as many, which might have its own advantages, I suppose. But so that is my method. Simply take a lot with a camera with a good macro. But I also have a Panasonic Lumix, which is a bridge camera. Again, it's not an expensive camera, nothing fancy, fixed lens, but it has a long zoom, and I can get 3 feet away on 50 times magnification, which doesn't mean very much in terms of what you think of binoculars, but you get a good magnification from a distance no closer than 3 feet. So for something like a butterfly, then that works. The little Olympus stuff does not work because you can't get to within the required sort of 4 inches maximum to get a big magnification. So horses for courses, but just get to know your equipment and practice a lot. Yeah.
You've clearly done that, and I did think as you went through that these are a professional quality. It's just astonishing photography. And one comment, not a question, but just to say, what a fabulous talk with wonderful photos. That's a comment from a Mr. George McGavin.
Yeah. Did you send him a link?
No, but he's got one, and he's enjoyed the presentation. So I think that speaks volumes. So earlier in the season, you did the first half of the year, which overlaps with where we are now. Are you noticing much difference this year to last in any of the things you're seeing around, or the timing?
No, I can't honestly say so. I mean, we've come full circle now, so starting to see the same things as the start of lockdown last year. Saw my first orange tip butterfly the other day, but not in our garden. So, no, I can't say that I'm noticing any difference. You need to look over such a long time, really, and there's so many differences in weather and, you know, whatever. So.
And you mentioned photographing from kind of 3 feet and you can get the magnification. Do you only choose species that will sit still when you're 3 feet away? Because
oh, no,
I know when there was the Yorkshire Wildlife survey last summer, I couldn't get anywhere near.
My language when I'm talking to these insects, I wouldn't, it's not very ladylike, you know, you little, quite often. So no, you do miss a lot. I mean, trying just now to do tawny mining bees, particularly the males, they will not sit still. I cannot get near enough them with the Olympus, because you do have to be so close. So I try with the Lumix and they won't sit still. So it's very, very frustrating. Just occasionally looks on your side and you can get something.
Do you tend to concentrate on certain times of day to get best light conditions, or does it, you just, anytime you see something you do it?
When it's not too windy and the sun's out but not too strong. The light's nicer for, you know, proper photography early and late, but for insects, the other big problem when you do have the sun, you're going to cast a shadow over it, and that's really frustrating. So you've either got to take it into the light or from the side, or so it really is just a question of taking an awful lot of pictures.
Yeah, and then sifting through them. So thanks, you know, those were exceptional. So the last of the questions I have in from people so far, and then I'll hand back to Helen if she has any, but this one is, you said one of the flies looked like a bee. How do you tell whether something is a fly or a bee?
Well, I mean, it depends how many wings it's got, but you can't always see that very easily. So flies have the 2 wings, and the second pair of wings are reduced to the 2 little bobbles that you can sometimes see that help them balance the whole tails. And bees have the 2 pairs. The eyes are completely different. The antennae are different. So you've just got to learn. You've just got to look at the selection. I mean, George could give a much better answer than that. But so how would you know that big fat black thing is a fly and not a bee? Well, its face and its antennae would be a dead giveaway in that case. It just doesn't look like a bee.
Thank you. I think that's a really accomplished answer, which just says to me, I'll never know. Thanks ever so much, Anne. That's just been astonishingly good. So I'll hand back to Helen.
Thanks, Jeff. And I've actually got a question of my own.
Right.
I can't actually post in the Q&A for some reason. I think as a panelist, you can't do that. So so I've not been able to ask mine. So I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask it now. How do you remember all those Latin names?
Well, not for very long is the answer to that. So yes, I can remember them for, well, increasingly short, if you like, length of time. So, you know, 20 years ago, I could have remembered them for nearly 24 hours. Now, maybe about an hour and a half, you know. So just before I do a talk, I have to say, that was, and so yeah, it is extremely difficult. Some that you've used for a long time do stick. Episurface balteatus, well, that's easy, you know, it's just, you use that a lot. But some of the more obscure flies and things, and then you, oh God, what was the name? but I could say anything, of course. I mean, how do you know that the Latin I was telling you was anything like right?
It would have been total rubbish for all I knew.
I could just have been making it up. So I don't think there's an easy answer, except familiarity and you know, how old your brain's getting, really. And I did like Latin at school. Latin, for some reason, I was really good at Latin, and So it has come in useful.
You've got that foundation in the classics to underlie everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry to put back in, Helen and Anne, but there's a question on the chat that I missed before that I think people might like to know. What are the 3 plants that Anne would recommend planting in our gardens to attract insects?
Okay, well, now then, well, field scabious is really very good, and it's liked by everything from bees to butterflies to bugs, and it's easy to grow. One of the crane's bills, meadow crane's bill, or well, probably meadow crane's bill, is very good. Viper's bugloss, which we'd passed by now because that's really more up until the end of June. Viper's bugloss can be fairly phenomenal, and if you can stand it and you don't mind it sort of, you know, uprooting your flags and your concrete, then he's just shouting red valerian. Yeah, red valerian is phenomenal, and if you want hummingbird hawk moths, that's where you're going to get them, on red valerian.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. Absolutely terrific, just like last time. A complete aesthetic feast, absolutely wonderful photographs, and an incredible wealth of knowledge. And you had me absolutely fooled with those Latin names. I thought they were lodged in your brain long term.
No, or if only.
Completely taken in. You didn't look as though you'd been swatting up at all. Absolutely fantastic. So I hope everyone, you have enjoyed this as much as I have. I'm sure that you have. Just a couple of quick announcements before we finish. One is that we've got one more talk left in this winter programme. It's going to be on the 20th of April by Matt Whittle, and it's just entitled Bats. And I know I've seen 1 or 2 already flitting about the garden, so I'm very much looking forward to that and getting better at knowing which ones might be which. And I'm sure Matt's going to help us find out. And the other announcement is that, of course, after the winter programme is over, the summer programme begins. The first events on the summer programme begin in May. So I think the programme isn't yet up on the website, but will be shortly. And we're also going to email it out. And so keep your eyes open for it. And I hope that I will be seeing lots of you at some of the events we've got on offer. It's looking as though the lockdown opening up is going ahead as planned, at least for the meantime. So yeah, fingers crossed that we're going to have a year that's a bit more back to normal than last year was. And looking forward to seeing you very much over the summer. Bye-bye.